All
How
right.
exciting.
I believe we're alive. We are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Today here I have Will You. I assume that I'm actually not sure. Like on Zoom, sometimes like the order is different. I believe I'm on the
All
left side
right.
of the screen for everyone, and Will's here on my right for everyone. I'm going to start by first introducing Will. So Will is a PhD student here at Stanford in bioengineering, not tissue engineering or tissue engineering.
Bioengineering. The subset
Bioengineering.
of bioengineering is tissue engineering, but yeah.
Okay, cool. So yes, tissue engineering within bioengineering. We're going to be talking about all sorts of cool, interesting topics related to bioengineering and tissue printing and things like that, and just sort of having a casual conversation about this. But I want to start for many people who haven't been on the Super platform. So while I'm demoing, practicing, sort of launching a podcast or being in a podcast setting, hosting a podcast, we're also demoing this Super platform. There's a lot of stuff that can be done here. But basically, you don't have to worry about anything. What I want to tell people is if you're in the audience and you want to ask a question, you can either do so in the public chat, which should be on your right. You can do so by joining the stage. So right now, Will and I are on stage. You can actually turn on your microphone and your camera if you'd like, and you can step on stage with us, ask us a question. There's also the ability, once you're on stage, to take a selfie with us if you're interested at all. This platform obviously maybe isn't built for scientists, maybe more so for influencers, but we can be both.
It's the new era.
Yeah, you can also use a super chat. So if you use a super chat, typically this is a way for people to like get the attention of a creator, in the sense of if I were an influencer and not a scientist. And so those are like paid chats. And if you normally that money goes to the creator. If anyone chooses to use the super chat, I will donate them the money to a charity of some neuroscience related cause yet to be determined. And then, there's some other stuff in here that we're going to get into. So we're going to stay here on the meet and greet stage as we host our conversation. If you want to ask a question, there are two people in the queue right now. I'm not sure if they know that they're in the queue or if they intended to be in the queue. If they want to be on stage, please just say something in the chat so I'll know. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, Will, welcome. Thanks for being here. I see you have your lab coat on. Are you, in fact, in the lab right now?
Yeah, so actually I was just running some RNA reverse transcriptase to try and get some gene expression data. I found myself an empty conference room over here by our lab area. So just coming in straight from the lab here, but super excited to be here.
Nice. So it's not a fake lab coat that you put on at home.
No.
It's the real one.
Although I do have one.
Really?
I do have one just for the prop. Yeah.
Yeah. That is like the widest TV screen I've ever seen behind you. That when you just turned, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So let me just get my screen set up here. Okay, so you study tissue engineering, and I want to start by asking the group here a question. You can do a poll, and I'm practicing. I'm just sort of messing around. I want to ask the people, did you know before this, maybe before you saw my TikTok video, before you saw the the promotion that I was sharing for this, did you know that tissue engineering existed, that scientists could bioprint biological materials like organs and things like this? Because I'm not sure how much of the world knows this. So please, is it yes, sort of, maybe you had an idea, or no, you didn't know at all? This is going to be an interesting sense of like, where does humanity stand on tissue engineering? Okay, so Patrick just joined the queue. Okay, Patrick, let's get you on stage here. What's going on, Patrick?
Hey, welcome on in.
I'm getting ready for my live show too. I have one in an hour.
Awesome. You're hosting one here?
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, thanks for being here. Do you have any questions about tissue engineering while you're up here on stage? Did you know that tissue engineering existed?
No, I answered no in the poll.
All right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, let's get right into this. Okay, so someone's messing around. So now it's starting to shift towards yes. People are beginning to understand that tissue engineering exists. Okay, let's go back to the main discussion here. I'm playing around with this. So Patrick, would you like to stay up here on stage with us? You can hang out and chat if you'd
Sure.
like. All right.
Thanks.
So
Let's go. That's why this platform's awesome. I can just chill here.
That's right. So
wild.
Well, why don't you just, I think 37% of people there said they didn't know that tissue engineering existed. So if you could just sort of define what the field is, what's the goal of the field, and where does it currently stand in achieving those goals?
Yeah, so I guess to provide some context of how I learned that tissue engineering exists. So when I was applying for universities, I was looking into like, okay, what would be like a cool major to look into? And I thought, I was always like okay at math and physics, kind of like biology. And then I heard about this field called biomedical engineering, which is like basically just the intersection of doing engineering with biological systems. I was like, okay, this seems pretty cool. I went into this space and just kind of browsing the catalog. That was when I discovered that, oh, what is this thing called tissue engineering? And it's basically all these fancy terms are a lot simpler than you think. It's literally just trying to engineer tissues. So we engineer electronics, we engineer robots, and why don't we put those same principles of how we build something from scratch into can we actually build organs and tissues from something as simple as skin to something as complex as a human beating heart that's functional? And so there's high goals, of course, knowing that there's so many people in need of major organs like kidneys or hearts. And a fact of the matter is that there's just never enough donors out there to meet the huge need for all the patients out there that are in need of new organs. And so the problem that tissue engineering is trying to solve is, well, we actually have a pretty strong understanding of how we can isolate living cells from people or from other animals, culture them, grow them, and then now the idea is, well, if we can do this on a petri dish, can we do this on something that's actually three-dimensional? Because there's very little biological tissues that actually exist just on a flat sheet. Skin is pretty nice and simpler for that very reason. But the general idea is like, let's start with a cell, and it can be either an adult differentiated cell, a cell that already knows its job and what it's going to be doing, or you can start with a stem cell, essentially like a baby cell that has unlimited potential to differentiate into something on your skin, a muscle that's helping to beat your heart, a neuron that works in your brain. And if we can give it just the right chemical factors, there's some growth factors to help encourage it in that and to grow in and differentiate, to do that right job that we wanted for, and put it in a nice little 3D house of sorts. We call them scaffolds. Then with the right housing, the 3D scaffold, with the right growth factors, and with the right maybe even mechanical stimuli. We know that for our muscles or for our bones, these tissues constantly experience a mechanical load as you walk and climb stairs. And so with all these right factors, we can actually start growing some of these organs from scratch. And what's awesome is that whenever you're doing surgical interventions with maybe replacing your own tissue with someone else's, there's a chance that your immune system might get in the way, might reject this foreign matter. But if you can grow your own organs from your own cells, then you won't have that issue at all. So these are kind of the dreams and goals of the field, is to eventually be able to hit this big unmet need of all these people that need organs due to organ failure or other reasons. And if we can grow them from their own cells, that would be amazing. And we're getting pretty far along that technology.
That's very interesting, and it sounds so futuristic. It sounds like not dystopian, but like a little bit 1984 kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely sci-fi-esque.
Yes, but it almost seems inevitable that it's going to be a part of the future. The future of science and medicine, and maybe even steak, as we will get to later on. Patrick, I appreciate you being on the stage and joining us here. I'm sorry, I'm gonna remove you back to the queue, so that if anyone else wants to join the stage and ask questions, they can do so. Or if you'd like to honorably step down, so I don't have to physically remove you, it would be appreciated. But thank you for joining us and for hyping up the chat. I appreciate that, and for sharing this picture of you escaping from a police officer in a Mario costume on a go-kart.
Brilliant.
Okay. Oh shit. I'm sorry. My language. So yeah, and one of the things that when you were talking, it made me think. You were talking about how if we can just get them into like the right scaffold, right? If we can take, so let me back up for a second, and just if anyone in the audience isn't aware of this, as science as a field has grown very, very capable of culturing. We call them culturing cells. So you can take cells from various tissues. You can take them from the brain. You could take them from skin, whatever, and you can grow them in essentially a dish. You know, that's how you always think of like cells in a dish. With the appropriate growth factors, you can allow these cells to basically proliferate on their own, so they can continue to grow. And in some cases, with the right factors applied to them, we can cause them to turn back into stem cells. So if you have skin cells, you can turn them into stem cells, and stem cells are like God cells. They can become anything. And once they're at stem cells, then we can apply a different set of chemicals to make them turn into something else, which is what Will was referring to. And so just in case anyone didn't have that background understanding. So this is just unbelievable. So we could take skin cells from someone, turn them into heart cells, and then maybe implant them into someone's heart, or maybe just build an entire heart. But what I was originally saying is that it's all about the scaffolding. It's all about like the matrix and the organization of the cells. And it's kind of unbelievable when you see, like, for example, I know this about brain cells. If you have them in a dish and you do the right things to them, essentially, if you give them the right nutrients, and in some cases, I think in all cases, you have to sort of rotate them, keep them moving. They will cluster and they will form what we call brain organoids, where they will essentially like form a brain, like a mini tiny little brain.
A mini brain.
And
it's wild.
It's unbelievable. It makes, for me, this is a little bit sensationalistic, I guess, but I tend to think of like, it's almost like they're intelligent beings on their own, that they have like this drive to just clump together and form friends. You know, it's so non-scientific to talk about it that way, but I'm just blown away by the ability of cells to make these, you know, in very intelligent structures and capable structures without any clear direction. You know, it just, sometimes they seem to do it on their own.
Okay, my mind's like shooting in a million directions right now, but I think first, can we like step back to like how freaking cool induced pluripotent stem cells are? Like pluripotent, meaning pluri as in like a lot, and potent as like your potential. So essentially, induced pluripotency is where you take something that's like already your skin cell and you give it the right growth factors to make it return back to a stem cell state where it can then redifferentiate into something completely different. Like how it's so crazy to me that you can take someone's skin and then change it into a heart later on. And this is like certainly the future of like the stem cell field, which has really lend itself into tissue engineering now, because a lot of tissue engineering strategies, you can imagine, be a lot easier to build an organ if you already start with the right pieces. This is kind of like, instead of starting with a set of Legos to like build your Star Destroyer, instead you're starting with like the actual plastic, like the melted down plastic that you like fill into molds and then like build the pieces to then build the piece. It's wild how you can just melt down these Legos and make new ones to build a completely new structure.
And
but
that seems
on
to
the top, yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that
No,
seems
keep
to
going,
like
keep going. Yeah, jump
defy
in.
the conventional laws of science. You know, it's like it's this one field of science where you have truly infinite possibility with a cell, that you can make it into almost anything. And it's so cool. I'm so glad that tissue engineering as a field is capitalizing on that power to turn into helpful medical applications for growing organs and things. I'm sorry for interrupting you though.
No, not at all. I think that ties really well with one of the questions I see in the chat by Runbo Lee of like, what are the most common tissue engineered? So recently there's been like some amazing studies published upon the engineering of a bioprinted heart. And so I think later on we'll be talking about some fun stuff with just like bioprinting some meats that we're growing in the lab. But scientists in Israel, the technique is um, they have a bath of hydrogel. You can imagine, I guess like the easiest way to think of it is imagine you take like a shaving gel and you just like fill a little tub of that and you like poke in a little needle or a syringe and you start like releasing some food dye, and because the gel is viscous enough you can penetrate through the gel to actually start extruding out some ink out there, but it's dense enough and strong enough to actually hold its shape, and so you can then really precisely print within a three-dimensional space. And so what's awesome is that maybe a better analogy would be something like a snow cone, where you have like a snow cone of just shaved ice, and you're like putting in the syrup like inside the ice, and all you have to do is just raise the temperature back up. The ice all melts, and you're left with the solid ink that you printed out, which has solidified over that time. And so that's like the highest end of complexity that we're like aiming towards. um, but really, the field of tissue engineering started with and still predominantly dominated by simple organs and simple tissues, things that have no more than one cell type. And so, what's really cool is that there's a lot of really necessary applications of simple tissue types. For example, skin. You can imagine someone that has been the victim of burns. You can much more easily build a skin type tissue, which is much simpler of a tissue type. Or for someone that has joint pain from arthritis, engineering cartilage like tissue is much simpler because cartilage is made up of only one cell type called the chondrocyte. So a lot of my research in undergrad at Columbia University with Clark Hung was trying to engineer functional articular cartilage, which is the cartilage that lines your joints, which oftentimes wears away with age or with injury. And so these are some of the most common types of tissue engineered, like blood vessels, um, skin, cartilage, bone. Um, so lots of orthopedic applications. I think there's a lot more attention being put into the cardiovascular system with making engineered heart valves or whole hearts that we're seeing now, which is crazy. Oh, Ben, I'm not sure if I can hear you right now. I'm not sure if that's a my end thing or. Ooh, I think I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that was my fault. I'm messing around with my sound settings. Okay, so yeah, I was going to ask you, so what the most common tissue engineered are. But yeah, so where does the field currently stand in terms of we've figured out, I'm not a member of this field. Science has figured out how to
Yeah.
create stem cells, how to differentiate stem cells into various types of cells. Is the current challenge like figuring out how to actually build like mechanical systems to create, like how to like build 3D printers essentially for biomaterials?
Mm.
Or is the challenge more in like we put cells into the shape of a heart but it doesn't beat, and like figuring out how to make it more biologically functional?
Yeah. Oh, I think biologically functional is a huge part, and I think scale is going to be one of the biggest issues. Is that um, one of the biggest challenges of growing anything that is physiologically relevant at the human scale is anytime you have big organs or big tissues, it's really, really hard for nutrients to actually diffuse through cells to other cells. Um, oh, hey Patrick, looks like we have another guest here. Very cool. and uh, and one of our challenges, hey man, one of our challenges is trying to, if we're going to make functional tissue that's relevant for humans, is to get them at scale for humans. So, like we've had many experience where we've made small organs that can be implanted into mice models and things like that. But once you get to larger scale organs, you'll have that outside of your cells being super happy, and when you're culturing them in media, giving them the nice nutrients that they need. But all of those cells kind of in the middle get real sad and real starved for those same nutrients because diffusion diffusion's a beach. It's a it's a real challenging physical phenomenon to overcome. And so one of the recent um, leaps in the field, it's been fairly stagnant, I think, over a couple decades or so. And one of the major leaps has been in bioprinting. You can actually start to engineer in blood vessels as you're building these tissues. And with vascularization, now you can really solve that problem of trying to get those nutrients and proper growth factors deep into larger tissues. So I think what we're really going to be seeing a lot more of is with this stealing of 3D printing technology and using it for tissue engineering, I think you're going to see a lot more progress in actually making organs that are to scale, and then, as you mentioned earlier, functionalizing them is going to be like a big concern. Um, Certain tissues, their functional aspect when it comes to cartilage or bone just needs to be having the right biochemical components to make sure that, okay, this is bone that we've made, and having the right mechanical properties as well. Like, can you load weight? But whenever we're implanting these things in as well, you also need to look at, okay, how will it integrate with the surrounding tissue as well? And can you keep it alive long enough during all of the very damaging aspects of surgery to avoid that that donor site morbidity, the surgical site morbidity of killing cells there? It turns out when you engineer these cells, they do great when they're alive, and if they die out, they do real bad. And so trying to keep these alive long enough during a kind of a surgical intervention is also going to be a big challenge of that field. Oh, Ben, I think I'm not getting any audio again, unfortunately.
Okay, how's that? How's this? Is this working now?
Perfect. Yeah.
I've been, as you saw, I took my headphones out. I'm now messing with the microphone in my computer, so I hope my audio quality is okay. So when you were talking, you made me think of, again, another neuroscience thing that I had been aware of well before I learned of tissue engineering as a field, and it's the same idea. Going back to what I was describing, where brain cells will cluster and form these little tiny organoids. One of the big problems is that once they cluster and they continue to grow, it doesn't. Human brain is about yay large, but organoid is tiny, like tiny, and the problem is that the cells on the inside are not getting the right vasculature. They're not getting the right media and nutrient delivery. So that's a big thing that was originally happening in the brain organoid field, was trying to implement vessels to deliver nutrients internally. Because also you get to a point where it's like you got a clump, but it's not really a brain, and that's also a continuing problem with the field. But the more you can deliver nutrients ubiquitously throughout the tissue, the closer you get to a brain. But I'm going to take this opportunity to bring up this steak idea because obviously, so cultured meats. I literally just learned about this the other day. Cultured meats are steaks in this case. I'm not sure how much you know about cultured meats, but like, is there like chicken? Is there like burgers, or is it just steaks typically?
I don't know. That's what I've heard about the most, is like trying to culture beef. There's got to be efforts to culture chicken. Maybe it's primarily red meat, but
I would think chicken would be easier because it's just one continuous.
I do know that there's bioprinted vegan meat options already that there's like several companies working on those fields as well.
Okay, so there's two questions I have, but so I want to talk about this idea of the steak though, because it's kind of funny, but it's also really it's sort of informational and kind of a good education opportunity. So when you're talking about printing an organ, right? like you described, that gel matrix where you're printing it into the correct format, right? In this case, what they're using is they're taking cow muscle cells and they're growing them in culture in a dish essentially, and then printing them into a steak shape. But the paper that I want to talk about, and let me go to the media section and pull this. So let me show you this figure first. So they have these. There was this cow which was unfortunately slaughtered, and they took the cells from it and they sorted them. And I don't know if you have any comments on this figure right here, or if you have anything that you'd like to point out, but I just want to show this to basically that this is from a scientific paper. It's published in the journal Nature Communications, which is a great scientific journal. And they culture these muscle cells and then they deliver them into, you know, that gel matrix in the shape of a steak. That's the idea of tissue cultured meats. But in this paper specifically, they wanted to capitalize on what Will was just describing, with that ability to integrate vessel, you know, vascular tissue into the whatever you're generating. And so this group said, you know, cultured meats, you know, the steaks are nice, but we really want to get that beautiful marbling texture in wagyu.
The funniest thing is that these are you know, Japanese scientists from Osaka, and I don't know if have you ever had Japanese wagyu before?
I've had that something that restaurants told me was, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think normally American restaurants will use American wagyu, which is very, very different in quality from Japanese wagyu, and I think you're pretty much just paying an upcharge for it to be called wagyu when it's like not too different in quality. But I had Japanese wagyu once, and it's crazy the amount of fat in that meat. It makes it so like the moment it like touches your tongue, it just melts. It's like more of a gel than a meat, I would say. It's a wild experience.
Well, let me pull up this figure. This is, again, a figure from a scientific paper. And what you're looking at here is the steak that they bioengineered. So they 3D printed the steak using not only muscle cells, but also fat cells and blood vessel cells. And, you know, aiming for the texture of a Wagyu steak. And it's kind of funny because if you look in the bottom right, panel C, that looks like a very, very fatty piece of steak to me. And I was looking at it thinking,
oh, Lord,
is this like really what we're going for? But after what you just said, Will, it seems like that is what they were in fact going for. But what's funny is, you know, I learned this. Obviously, they didn't mention this in the paper directly, but they mentioned it like in interviews for press afterwards, because of course the media was interested in this. So this panel C, this tiny little thing of steak, you can actually see there's a ruler behind it that is 1.5 cubic centimeters of steak. So it's absolutely
a small boy. it's a little chunk.
Yeah. And the authors said that would cost right now for them about $900 to produce. So I'm trying to be interactive with these. So I want to ask the audience, would you eat a 3D bioprinted steak? And specifically the steak that I just showed. And while people are answering that, I'm going to take a second to answer from the chat. Someone asked, where did you go to college? So Will, would you like to answer that first?
Yeah, so I went to for undergrad, I went to Columbia University, the School of Engineering and Applied Science, where I studied biomedical engineering with also a pre-med specialization. It's pre-med focus. Yeah.
Nice.
And now I'm with Ben here at Stanford University as a PhD candidate.
Yes, indeed. And I don't know if this is intended for me, and if anyone cares, whatever, I'll answer just in case it was. I did my undergrad at West Virginia University, actually, in West Virginia, the state that no one knows exists, but it's actually its own. And
oh no.
And then did my PhD in Buffalo. It's SUNY Buffalo State University of New York at Buffalo. So the reason I included this third option here, I'd have to see it and sniff it first. That's kind of where I would fall on this personally. I'm like, it looks like, so 60% say yes, 20% are just a hard no, 23%, and then 15% are hanging out with me. So I'm going to go back to the picture. I mean, just looking at this panel C image, really all of them. I'm not gonna lie, panel B does look a little bit good. We have to also acknowledge that this is uncooked, and I'm really sorry if there are people in the audience who are vegan or vegetarian, because this is a very meat centric conversation at this moment. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's an interesting application and demonstration of the field of tissue engineering and what can be done. Oh, did you just add something?
I just added something. If you want to switch over to that, for our vegetarian and vegans in the chat, there are also bioprinted vegan meats, and so yeah, the field is very inclusive for
Wow.
hitting people of any dietary needs.
You know, I'm really glad that you showed this, because I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Also, just a reminder, if anyone's here and they want to step on stage with us and ask a question with your camera on or with just your microphone, feel free. Also, of course, so if you want to do that, you have to hit join the queue. Great question. So another great question just came in. Let's answer that first, and then I'll get to my question. So Shay said, is this better for the environment?
Yeah, that's one of the fundamental questions. It would be so right now, I think, regardless of whether or not you choose to eat meat or not eat meat out of religious or just dietary preferences, I think it's like without a shadow of doubt, the meat industry is horrible for the environment and so energy wasteful. I think one of my favorite YouTubers, Mark Rober, did a video with Bill Gates where he showed like visually how many burgers um provides, how much energy is made to make a single burger with like a beef patty that could instead be going into crops, that and how many people that could feed instead. And the scale is absolutely ridiculous of how wasteful and energy it is to be eating meat. And it would be a little bit hard to I guess compare right now, given the current technology, because it is extremely expensive to produce even that small little 5 millimeter, half cubic centimeter piece of wagyu for $900. And you can imagine with all the costs that go into that labor, it would be hard pressed to not actually have it be better for the environment to just do it with a live cow in that instance. But
Yeah.
I think when you're thinking long term and building this technology, the ultimate goal is absolutely for this to be better for the environment. And I think that's really why there's so much attention being pushed towards cultured meats, is to really try and hit this gaping problem of how important it is for us to think about our race's longevity, the human race's longevity here on Earth, and trying to be more environmentally conscious of the incredible amount of energy. And knowing that meat eating is such a cultural aspect for certain groups, and understanding that it will be probably with more resistance than it's possible to actually make anything happen to try and push out the meat industry. I think adding competition instead with cultured meats that can be more environmentally conscious is a huge step, I think, in the right direction.
Yeah, I think in principle, it seems that it should be better for the environment, but at the same time, not to go all like I hate corporations and all that, but corporations big corporations tend to do a poor job of moderating their damage, the damage they leave behind. And as Will, you and I both know, running a research lab or running the type of lab that would be required to do this requires a lot of energy in itself and a ton of money. Keeping a bunch of so it's very typical for those who don't work in labs. It's very, very typical to keep biological samples, frozen in a -80 Celsius freezer, that it is freezing. When you open one of those and you reach your hand in and you touch something for 5-10 seconds, your hand is like burning. It is really, really cold, and it uses a lot of energy. So I could just imagine if this does become a big thing, the companies behind this having just like rows and rows and rows of -80 freezers with nothing in them, just like destroying the environment and burning up energy. So in principle, it should help the environment. But you know, like any capitalism adventure, I feel that it could end up, you know, causing more problems down the road, but different problems.
Yeah.
Be better. But
Hmm.
there's another question from Justin. Could the nutrient content of cultivated meat be modified? For example, increase omega-3 fatty acid content. And I'm going to let you answer that in a second. I just want to state this. I really can't help but feel like, although it seems so foreign and weird and futuristic and whatever, intergalactic right now, I think that this is actually the future of humanity. I believe that there's a good chance that we could end up creating a lot of our nutrients in this way, you know, by actually engineering our own foods. Because, for example, this steak idea, it illustrates how we can take we can essentially build the perfect steak for whatever someone's preferences are. And just in the same way, we could build the perfect meal for whatever. If the goal is to target a specific, you know, building in a lot of a certain nutrient or building in a lot of whatever, you know, it just feels like so intelligent that we can really use it in a beneficial way to improve health. But please weigh in, and I'm going to go back to
Yeah.
the main stage so we can just chat here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's so interesting how like the introduction of this new technology brings in like old questions as well of like modifying nutrient content. And I think something maybe a tangential conversation, but whenever we're talking about food and the future of food, I think genetically modified organisms, GMOs, actually received this like huge public backlash and in many cases corporate interests of a public backlash in order to have other forms of food be able to better compete. And I think there's a general there's like it's hard to trust something that's lab grown or something that is based upon technology you really don't understand. But really since oh my goodness, I don't know the history super well, but it's like decades upon decades, if not centuries, in terms of trying to select crops for the ones with the best nutrient composition. Um, we've been modifying nutrient content in all of our like natural organisms for ages now. It's and so absolutely, can you be looking at trying to make all of these cultured meats healthier? Something that's really interesting is that part of this study that we were looking at from nature is in trying to make this seem more appealing or interesting to like a general public. It's trying to imitate nature as much as possible. And like we've already have technology to blueprint meats that are much simpler, of just fat and muscle content, or really just a super lean piece of meat as well. That's like incredibly simple when you're only using one type of tissue fiber. And so you can really modify these as much as possible. But what I think is like really niche and cute about that study, but also exciting, is the how far we can take this to really imitate like the most luxury of items of like a Japanese wagyu steak here. Because meat bioprinting, I think, entered it's this is like I think 2020 you started to see like a lot of startup companies actually really push this technology as bioprinting has really taken off, and companies looking about like how can we profit off of this. But there's also I think a good moral incentive as well of like trying to at least create alternatives to rethink the way in which we look at the food industry. And obviously knowing about how there are so many parts of the world where people are still food insecure, especially even here in America. I think it makes all the more sense to create as many options for new food, and with more competition, hopefully we can drive prices down and make things more affordable.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to this for a second and ask a question. So let's shift back. Let's shift away from steak and cultured meats and talk applications. You are in a lab coat after all, and not a butcher's gown. So gown. But I wanted to ask, like, in all the cases we've been discussing, we've been talking about using cultured cells and printing them into a specific structure or matrix. But I wanted to ask, does 3D bioprinting or tissue engineering ever occur with non-biological materials? Like, for example, this vegan meat is what I wanted to ask about, and maybe if we could build this conversation into how this is used for medical context. Are there ever scenarios where non-biological tissues are designed and then implemented into human beings?
So this is actually an amazing question, because a huge roadblock, an obstacle that a lot of technology has to overcome before you can reach clinical trials is being able to really prove without a shadow of doubt safety. And whenever you're using live cells for something that you're going to be surgically transplanting, one of the biggest things you have to be really careful about, especially when you're dealing with stem cells, is, are we going to have our cells grow in a controlled fashion? Because our body is constantly this really fine, delicate balance of creating new cells and intentionally trying to kill off other cells in your body, making sure that all those cells that might have a potential to be cancerous, you cut them out early from your body. And so with our normal cells risk of mutation over just natural replenishing cycles, it's really hard to approve of human clinical trials that involve stem cells or human cells in this case. And so a huge clinically relevant and translatable field is trying to use acellular scaffolds. Instead of engineering these tissues with the cells already inside, what if we just give them the right home with the right signals that can then draw in all the surrounding cells that already are in your body to now take up this new home? And so there's a lot of current products out there, especially when it comes to skin grafts and healing burnt tissue, is like, let's actually provide a decellularized matrix, just a nice little gauze that will eventually become your skin tissue, but it doesn't have any cells yet, but it has all the right factors that induces the cell migrations into that space. I think the weirdest thing I've ever I think about is, like, when you think about like bacteria or viruses, like, you can think of like cells that, like, little things that are moving along, but your own cells have a tremendous amount of migratory potential. Like, your cells actually can move a pretty considerable distance from your body to get to where they need to be. Um, and whenever you have an injury, oftentimes what happens, like even with a cut, is you're going to be recruiting all sorts of cells to kind of fix up and close that gap and heal your wounds. And so a large part of the field is actually printing or designing acellular scaffolds, things without any cells that can just bring in your own cells that are already there and just accelerate your own healing response.
That's unbelievable. Yes. So let me see. I just need to figure out, we have a question coming. I'm going to feature a guest. I'm going to try at least. In the meantime, I'm going to address this other question. Someone asked, as a high school student, how would I be able to find colleges to intern over the summer? Any specific internships to high schoolers interested in research? I love that you want to be, Ari, I love that you want to be a researcher. We love to see that. A big goal, not only to share, a big goal of this is not only to share information about this field, but also to inspire students to maybe want to pursue these careers or take up an interest in it. So I will start by just saying, for anyone who's interested in research, whether you're in high school, college, or beyond college, whatever level, I would always recommend looking for the nearest university to you, and find, in this case, their tissue engineering. If they have a bioengineering department, most likely, find the faculty list, scroll through, read everyone's research descriptions. These will all be scientists who run their own research labs and also probably teach. And each of these professors will have a lab that you can potentially volunteer in. So read the description, see what type of research they're doing. And if you find a couple, or maybe one or none, but ideally a few that sound good to you, just send an email. Just say, hey, my name is Ari. I'm a high school student. I live, you don't have to say too much, but if you're within driving distance or whatever, you can get there, say, I would love to volunteer in your lab, and I want to know if there are any available research positions. So unfortunately, I think it's pretty hard to find specific internship programs. But Will, if you have anything else to add to
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Some of the best ways to find those internship programs is the professors will probably know the best over what options you have, and start local, and then like you can broaden your scope as you go. I think that when I was at Columbia University, I actually TA'd for a class that was dedicated towards high school students. And I TA'd this class called Physical Effects on Cells, which was in the Columbia University Biomedical Engineering main general laboratory. And it was like an awesome, so I know certain summer programs will have within them biomedical engineering programs or tissue engineering programs, or just a whole wide variety of things you can get yourself interested in. But if tissue engineering or a certain research field really captures your interest, I would say like go to your like a local university, look at their department page of whether it's biology, whether it's engineering, whatever field, look at their faculty and their research interest, and just send some cold emails out to professors, or uh and sometimes the best way to actually get a professor's attention is to go through their grad students. But the fact of the matter is that researchers absolutely love talking about their research. It can sometimes be a lonely discipline of actually, like, you go home to your friends and family and you like try to talk about like what you've been doing in the lab, and most people are like, all right, like, can I get on with my family dinner now? most it's such a niche field that oftentimes like seeing someone who's passionate, curious to learn, will be an amazing, amazing boost. And a big reason why a lot of researchers and professors take on that job is because they enjoy mentoring, and they enjoy interacting with young folk that are entering the field, the new generation of researchers. So I would definitely say just start emailing professors and saying like, hey, I'm just interested in this research field. I would love to get like whatever experience I can. Is there like volunteering opportunities over the summer, or do you know of any programs that you would recommend I apply for to kind of continue getting more experience in this field? And the best way is just getting that experience, that hands-on experience is absolutely the way to figure out like what research really captures your interest.
For sure. It's a total game changer. So we have a question. Welcome to the stage. How are you?
Hello, how are you guys? Okay, so this is kind of a long question, so I thought I'd just kind of say it, but I didn't know that my screen would be on. But basically, I kind of work in like the healthcare setting, and so within healthcare, one of the wound care doctors that I had kind of followed around was saying something about like umbilical cells used in treating wounds. So that's kind of like alongside tissue engineering and what you were talking about. But I couldn't help but like kind of wonder outside of that, just like in general about tissue engineering, what are some ethical concerns that you think could possibly like arise in terms of trying to use tissues from like other people and putting them into others, or even within like using tissue cells from a person and putting them within one's own self, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much for asking this question. Will, I will let you answer it. But I just want to say thank you for joining the stage. And also, I'm glad you didn't type all that out because that would have been terrible.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Oh my goodness. What amazing points you bring up. I think first, because it's easier, starting with the umbilical cords. If you think about how many babies are born, just like all the time, your umbilical cord is like this extremely rich and healthy source of stem cells that are really being used a lot more for their potential therapeutic and research purposes. So I think it's like awesome because like naturally, like what would happen? You would just like throw it away in the trash. Like that's kind of a gnarly thought. But being able to like use those to actually further our research, to maybe even help people, definitely seems like the most ethical course of action. But oh my goodness, like the ethics is so juicy of a topic. some of the experiments that you'll see in the tissue engineering field really can sometimes induce a kind of like a visceral yuck reaction. And I think there's a lot of like a school of thought within like morality and ethics that like sometimes it's really good to like listen to that gut feeling of that yuck. And like one of the earliest pieces of tissue engineering research was researchers put human stem cells into the back of a mouse, and they were able to grow an ear, like a human ear, on the back of a mouse. This is like one of the first things ever, and like maybe some people find it really cool. Maybe other people are like, "Wow, that's pretty gross." And you're right. There's tons of like questions that this brings up in the field, and I think there are multiple levels at which they've been addressed and where I think they haven't been properly addressed. I think that within the scientific community, the way in which a lot of these ethical concerns are tried to match is that before any research studies are funded, there's a really rigorous and intense ethics review that you must go under before the NIH or the government will grant you any funding to conduct your research. And the US is especially quite stringent in what they consider to be ethical research. So whenever you're using live animals to study things, or especially when you're going into human trials, they'll really make sure that like your technology is developed enough to like ensure that there's actually some positive effect that you can expect to occur, reasonably expect to occur. So there's no going to be just like kind of blindly trying things out and like hoping that things work out. Like you have to be really on top of things, and unfortunately it makes it really hard for things to sometimes make it to that clinical stage. So like within the science community, I think there's lots of checkpoints to make sure that the research is being conducted as ethically as possible. But from a public standpoint, I think that there's still some of those questions that haven't been properly addressed over just like the whole concept of like when we're growing organs, there's perhaps a fallacy, but the slippery slope all exists in our minds of like, if we're growing organs, are we going to be growing humans or animals next? And especially when we're thinking about like the stem cell research, when they were like cloning sheep for the first time, was it Dolly, I believe? Tons of concerns there that I don't think were properly addressed from scientists directly speaking to a public about like how they conceive of this versus just like the pursuit of scientific knowledge, or like obviously these technologies can be implemented into the clinic to help lives, but at what cost and at what potential dangers might occur. And it's interesting because me and Ben actually met in a group called Scientists Speak Up, which is all about having more of a discourse between scientists and people that aren't directly in their field, because oftentimes scientists will just speak to other scientists, and not even scientists across fields, will be scientists within their specific field, and every other word is some acronym, some jargony thing that no one else can understand. It's horrible. So I think that question is still something that's left to be really rigorously answered by scientists, in collaboration with professors of morality and ethics, and engaging in that, like, where will this technology go? I think a lot of times when you see the publications and the commentary about it, it's all about like how novel and cool this might be. And probably one of the biggest caveats to cutting edge research is that it's all based upon how cool of a story you can tell. And oftentimes the nitty gritty of the research is like, there's a lot more challenges and obstacles and roadblocks along the way. So realistically speaking, we're a long way from like the I think the super looming ethical concerns of like, are we going to be like growing humans at some point, or organ farms to help people out? But yeah, I think long story short, like still a lot of work needs to be done to, I think, answer those questions in a way that satisfies you know, a general public as well. So
Yeah, and I feel that
anything to add, Ben?
that generally applies to so many new fields of research as well. You know, as a neuroscientist, people often ask me about Neuralink, right, and implantable electrodes in the brain for the purpose of connecting with the internet without having to step on a computer and things like that. There's a lot of ethical debate to be had there, and frankly, I worry quite a bit that the people who will ultimately be making these decisions about whether or not this is a widely implemented technology and becomes available to the public through, you know, medical providers are largely politicians who don't understand this technology at all. So I really, one of the reasons why I do social media stuff in general is to sort of establish myself as a voice that can potentially be consulted by the government in times of question when there's a, you know, hey, should we implant electrodes into the brain? And I really hope that just the same with tissue engineering, you know, government bodies will ask scientists who study these types of technologies whether or not, like, what the real limitations are, where they feel that the line should be drawn. Because, you know, I'm not sure if the government can figure that out on their own. If we can trust them to.
Yeah.
Actually, to be totally honest, I totally found Dr. Brain on TikTok, but I also joined because I was registered through something else. But I honestly really like his content because the way that you explain like neuroscience research is just mind-bogglingly simple, and it's perfect. Honestly, it's amazing because so many times when like scientists are speaking jargon to like just the general population, it's so difficult to like, you know, use like abbreviations and then going from one abbreviation to the next and just being like, this actually talks about like 10 other things.
Mhm.
But you just, you know, like simple it down. I'm saying dumb it down, but it's just so digestible. And I think that's like the way to go in talking more about science and like research, because we as like a society are totally technologically advanced already, and is only gonna, you know, further that process in the future, especially like with, you know, tissue engineering as well. And to be able to have these types of conversations and to be able to talk about it in a way where like everybody understands the big picture and what's going on is like so important, because again, like the ethical implications like also come in with that as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your kind words.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I try my best, and I totally understand what you're saying, because, you know, just not even the other day, today, I was reading a paper and there was an acronym, and, you know, it's very common in scientific papers to abbreviate. So if you have a long term, you spell it out the first time and then you put parentheses, whatever the abbreviation you're going to use thereafter. And it happens to me all the time. I'm reading this paper and I get to like the fourth paragraph in the results section. I'm like, what is this abbreviation?
What is this? Yeah, what is this?
Variable that they're talking about. I don't even know what they're talking about. I missed it. I thought, oh, this probably won't be important, and I must have just not committed it to memory. So yeah, just and the thing is with seminars, when you're sitting in an event like this, listening to people talk, or if you're reading something like that, as soon as you miss that one cue, you're lost in the sauce, and it's game over from there. You can't pick it back up, because then you have no idea what's going on. So I hope that we didn't lose anybody throughout this. And but it's also important to keep in mind, because, you know, as you know, I'm sort of doing this as essentially a mini podcast and trying to see what it would be like, and that's a key factor to keep in mind, is whether or not I can actually make it all the way through a 1 hour conversation without using jargon or acronyms. So hopefully I succeeded. But yeah, so
hopefully we did all right. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have no further questions, do you have any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us here, and for your very kind words. And Will, I have another question. I asked my followers on Instagram to ask any questions that they would like to see answered. And I want to ask you this one. So it's a key question. The question states simply, can this be used to possibly replace organs for transplants? And we've already talked about this a bit. I want to ask you, what is the current status of this? Like, how feasible is it right now? Have people actually gotten organ transplants, or is it a distant hope and we're kind of just working on the organs? Like, where are we right now?
Yeah, I would say that realistically, we're quite far. We're quite far still. That's the end game goal here. I think each of these like small steps that we made along the way, like I think creating a actual beating heart has been done at a small scale. And like that was something that I feel like we would have just thought was completely impossible, even like 5, 10 years back. I think recently there's been like a pretty big breakthrough with incorporating bioprinting to add this vascularization. And I think we'll see an explosion of more attempts at creating functionalized organs. But I think right now there's just such a valley of death where in order to have this be something that ends up being clinically translatable, it needs to have like a much uh, greater sense of confirmed efficacy and be able to compete with the gold standard of treatments already, which is, you know, just like waiting for that right organ donor to show up, even if that's months to years. Um, if you can actually get an organ versus something that's been just engineered without much proof checking yet. So I would say that within the next decade, we'll be seeing like a lot more attempts at unique strategies of creating these functionalized organs. Um, Before we can put them into any humans, I think we're really going to want to see animal models where showing they're effective and an animal will be able to stay alive with these implanted organs. I think uh, what we'll definitely see much earlier is, I think, changes to musculoskeletal systems, where we're already seeing like many tissue engineering strategies being used for replacing skin or what I think will be bone and cartilage replacements or just regeneration strategies. And I think what's really cool about the field of tissue engineering, it's not just limited to growing new organs. You might think to yourself, like, man, this like sounds cool, but if we're that far off, what's its actual current purpose? Like, does it actually have any benefit now if we're not able to do that for several years later? And yeah, there's actually really cool ways that you can now study disease with a model of being able to grow an organ or grow models of those organ systems and be able to test it at a much higher scale and at much cheaper cost. So whenever you're doing things with mouses, Ben, with your research, you know how expensive it is to take care of those. And whenever you can do research on like effective models at smaller scale, it actually allows you to scale up the throughput of your research. And throughput means just like how many different tests you can do at one time. And I think we're seeing a lot of acceleration of research through tissue engineering strategies to create not just the organ themselves, but just models of the organs that we now test new drugs, new treatments on them, and first see if they pass that initial test.
Right. That's a great point. And another thing that I've been hoping to touch on is just this. I saw a few papers where they modeled, they were building models of the blood-brain barrier. And so for anyone who's not familiar, the brain, because it is so delicate and important, is kept separate from the rest of the body, essentially. And so there's a barrier between the brain and the rest of the body that blood must pass through. And so a lot of things are filtered out before they're able to access the brain. So in many cases, there may be a drug which targets a specific system. We know that it functions this way. We've tested it in cells. Maybe we've tested it by injecting it directly into the brain, not in humans, but in an animal model. And we know that it would be perfect for brain cancer, for example, or for schizophrenia or something, but it doesn't pass the blood
Can't
barrier.
get in. It doesn't get in. Oh no.
And so there's a lot of research funds to be saved by testing whether or not these drugs can pass the blood-brain barrier, either before a whole lot of research is invested into them, if there's no other way to get it into the brain, or there's a great deal of research involved in actually testing that in itself. How do you administer it to a person, and then you have to look for the effects, whether or not it passed through. So you can build a blood-brain barrier model and then essentially put your drug into it and see if it passed through without having to involve any human beings. So it's a great research tool in that sense. And this leads me to my final question. I will ask you, what do you feel is going to be most largely impacted in the future by tissue engineering? And I know there are many applications of tissue engineering, but I'm going to give you three options. Option one, the field of science. Like, for example, what I was just describing, it'll enhance our ability to conduct research experiments and investigate phenomena. Option two, medicine, where, for example, we'll be able to build organs and provide replacements. Or option three, the ultimate oddball, meat. Nutrition. What do you think? What do you imagine happening?
Oh, the biggest impact of all of these. Well, Ben, I gotta say, I really, really love like a good steak. And there's something about that bioprinted meat. It looks real gnarly. It's real pricey, but ooh, to try that out, I would love to cook that up and have my tiny bite-sized $900 morsel. So I feel like that'd be an amazing impact of this. More seriously, I think that while the end game goal of tissue engineering is this like idealized world where we can just grow organs to replace failed ones for treating patients, I think where we're probably seeing its most tangible effect right now is in accelerating research and being able to really accelerate science, which also has a clinical impact in being able to test so many more drugs so much quicker. If you Google search lab on a chip, or organ on a chip, there's so many, there's a terminology called a microfluidics, where it's like literally a little super small fluid flowing device where you just have like a small little channel of fluid going through either some cells that you create just at really small scale, and you can model something as complex as a kidney on a single like glass slide, something that's like literally this small. You can test the effects of a drug if it could get into your entire organ. And if there's Ben, I don't know how often you've had to move around, but in New York City, I remember this one time I was trying to move a couch to this fourth floor of this building, an apartment building in East Harlem, and we're lugging up these stairs because it doesn't have any elevators in the system. And by the time we finally get to the door, we realize that this couch is just too big to fit through the doorway. And you can imagine putting in all this effort of like assembly, of like thinking it through, of all the efforts it takes to get this couch up all these flights of stairs, only to figure out it doesn't enter at the last step. That's essentially how frustrating it could be, doing all this research to develop a drug, only to find out it doesn't pass through that blood-brain barrier. And so you save yourself a lot of effort, a lot of time to be able to test these things. And that's where the field is currently, I think, knocking it out of the park, is really allowing us to figure out effective drugs on such a higher level, and really try and accelerate all the research into these systems. So that would be my answer here. Although I do love the bioprinted meat.
I mean, it could be all three. That was a great analogy to use, and I think that that's something many people may not think about. There's so much money funneled into research, and that's phenomenal. There actually should be more money funneled into research, in my opinion, but a lot of that money is ultimately spent on experiments that fail. There's the way that you get research grants from the government or from foundations is by demonstrating, look, you write a long, thorough grant proposal where you say, this is the experiment that I want to conduct, or the set of experiments that I want to conduct. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to mitigate, the expenses. This is how we're going to design every experiment. And most importantly, this is the evidence that we already have that this is actually going to work. And in order to get a grant these days, which is very challenging, you need to have strong, what's called preliminary evidence, which is basically the data that suggests that your hypotheses are built upon a strong scientific foundation. And there is some evidence for it already. So even despite that, there is a lot of times what happens is research, a lab will get funded to study a specific topic. The evidence will be there, and then they'll start conducting that research and they'll find that it's not what they expected. And that happens all the time. Failure is inevitable in science, and it's okay. We learn from it, we build from it. But if we could have systems in place that can help direct those funds into a place where they're going to be used with a greater likelihood of success, of discovery, it will be potentially transformative for the field and increase the pace at which discoveries are made. Because for every single paper that you see coming out, like this meat paper we were just talking about, there are, I guarantee, probably 10 to 20 very similar papers that didn't come out. So because the experiments didn't pan out the way they wanted to. So things like this that can help us really like get closer to verifying hypotheses and develop more accurate hypotheses, essentially, and develop more test worthy hypotheses are very, very valuable to the field. People may not think about that stuff.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, money in research is like also like a huge can of worms to open. Have you recently, like, I've seen actually people talking more about how the scientific publishing industry and journals is like so whack. It's so whack.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. There's Dr. Dr. Glockenflecken or something like that. Don't know how to
yeah.
see the video that he put out.
Had an amazing skit. Yeah, where essentially, you go through all this blood, sweat, and tears to publish a journal, and you think like, okay, well, that's awesome. Like, it's a really prestigious journal. Wow, like, how much did they pay you for that? And it's nothing.
It's
nothing.
I was really watching that video. So, like Will was saying, that's essentially the premise of the video. It's a scientist and a friend talking, and he says, "Oh, I published in this great journal." And the other friend says, "How much did they pay you?" And he says, "No, nothing. They don't pay you." And the other friend's like, "Oh, well, so they must. Did they at least fund your research?" And the guy's like, "No. The government funds your research." And the friend says, "So they don't pay you and they don't fund your research, so they just get to publish
they must be a nonprofit or something, right?"
Yeah. No, yeah. He's like, "No, they're
probably making so much money."
And I was watching that video thinking, okay, he's going to get to it. And he never got to it. But the sad part is scientists have to pay journals to publish their papers. So a scientist has to write a grant, submit multiple applications usually, and really like fight for their life to get grant funding, which, by the way, doesn't only fund the lab, it also funds their salary in many cases. And then once they get the grant, then they perform the experiments. The experiments have to work. If the experiments work and they have a story, they have to write it up. They have to put all this effort into it. And then they submit it to a journal, which is free. The journal sends it to other scientists who review it for free. So they have to read the paper, provide high-level expert comments and revisions, and say basically, this is the peer review process. They're saying this is what it would need to be reviewed, to be published. In my opinion, they point out the flaws. So they do it for free. I was just reviewing a paper earlier today for free, and then they don't publish the material. If it gets accepted, they don't publish the paper for free. You have, as the scientist, have to pay them a publishing fee, which can range anywhere from like $2,000 to like $12,000 US just for it to be published. And what you're paying for theoretically is the cost that it requires for them to actually print your manuscript onto the paper within their journal, because they print it and then they send it out to their subscribers.
Which no one really accesses these in print anyways anymore.
Not anymore. I mean, back in the day, but it's unbelievable. And I'm really, really sorry if there's anyone here that works for a journal that is just
I'll just smack them down.
Yeah.
So just to like one last little thing is that like some actually cost you to even submit something in the first place, because they're saying like, we need to like review this and that takes effort, so you need to pay us to submit it. And that actually is a big reason why you have more bogus science journals these days. Is that with what a barrier to access it is to even submit something to be published. A lot of bogus science ends up getting published by these brand new publishing companies popping up internationally that think to themselves like, oh, all we have to do is just have a much lower cost of people submitting to us, and say that we'll get a decision back to you that will publish your paper a lot quicker than other journals. We might not have the highest reputation, but you can still claim to be a published, scientist after going through us. And I think that, Ben's all about debunking scientific misinformation. And some of the scientific misinformation you have to debunk is actually published scientific papers as well that just clearly did not go through a good peer review process. So
yeah, those journals, for anyone interested, are often called predatory journals. So what they'll do is I'm not going to, but I can share my screen, and I can go to my .edu email and I go to the trash folder. It's all these invitations from journals saying, publish your research with journal.
Yeah.
And it's, and there's no real indication if you're just a person who likes to scroll and read scientific journals, which God bless you if you're one of those people, but there's really no way to distinguish between whether it's a good journal or a predatory journal. I'm actually going to try to do something. Let's see what happens if I do this. Let me see. But I'm able to share my screen.
Ooh, look at that.
Oh, I have to. Oh boy. Okay.
Enable it.
I have to enable it. It's not.
Yeah, give it some permissions or. Yeah. We tried. Oh, whoa, what's happening? Ben, you're gone. Oh no. The camera and mic now disabled. It's a disaster. Oh no. Oh no. We lost Ben. Oh no. It's a disaster. No, can't hear you, unfortunately, Ben. Can't see you, can't hear you. We're in the dark. This is what it's like being a scientist. You're stumbling around in the dark, no senses, can't see anything, can't hear anything. And then from your spam folder comes a random journal that you've never heard of before from some country you've never heard of before that says, hello, Dr. Will, and you are still 7 years before getting your PhD. They go, hello, Dr. Will, we have read your esteemed publications and would be so interested in having you publish in our esteemed journal. Oh Lord. It was great being called a doctor though while still an undergrad. That was pretty interesting. But hey, we're back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. You're loud and clear.
That was hilarious. I was laughing at the commentary.
Do my little bit.
Let's take one more minute to talk about this. As you just experienced, Will is a master of improvisation and entertainment. He runs a Twitch channel, so he was not sweating. I would have been dripping sweat if I was put in that position. If I was on a show and someone just left and it was just me, I'd be But Will runs his own Twitch channel, and I think it's really cool to talk about this. So I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, but Will is a partner on Twitch, and he doesn't game. He's on there to talk about science and to connect with the general public, and on a very casual, friendly basis. And I've entered his streams, and they're a lot of fun, and his audience is extremely friendly, and I love being a part of it. I also did a live event with him in person with a handheld microphone, which was but I think maybe just if you just want to talk a little bit about, there we go. So he just put the link in the chat. If you just want to talk about what it the journals came after him. We're just seeing that message. what it's like being a Twitch streamer, and I guess sort of any advice that you might have for any students who are interested in getting into Twitch streaming as a scientist.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what got me started on Twitch in the first place was as a gamer. I didn't realize that you could be talking about science or talking about life or even doing cooking or traveling streams. But Twitch is a really cool live streaming platform, much like I guess YouTube, but rather than having pre-curated content, that's something similar to this, where you're kind of doing things live with all sorts of technical errors happening in the moment. There's something kind of fun and intimate about that experience of nothing's being edited. You're just completely talking live. And what's really cool about Twitch that I think Instagram or TikTok or Twitter doesn't have is the ability to really build a community and connect with them. I think this platform is pretty cool with the ability to literally bring people on while you're live and have those conversations. I might try and do some of these things too. I might try something like this, or stream a session of this on Twitch.
Yeah, dude.
But for, yeah, I think it'd be super cool. But for my Twitch streams, what I ended up discovering is that while I love gaming and I'll still stream games every now and then, it's just like such an amazing experience being able to connect with other human beings, have these conversations, whether about science, whether about trying to establish some kind of work-life balance. I think always as scientists, there's this push to making your work your life. And I think that while it's incredibly inspiring to see people dedicate their lives to science, I think it's also a little bit daunting of a task to be like, hey, I'm interested in science, but I'm also interested in like traveling, or I want to game, or I want to have like free time to do leisure activities. I want to have a life outside of my work still. And I think what Ben and I have been doing a lot is like trying to show more of like who we are besides just being scientists, and also being able to have other interests as well. And so if you follow me on twitch.tv/willutv, you can join me on streams every now and then where we have co-working sessions where we just kind of work together, chat together, hang out together. There will be sessions where I'll be gaming, sessions where we'll be talking about science or about pop culture, recent events in the news. I think everything's fair game, and it's just like a really cool space where you can start connecting with people and share bits of your life as well. So if anyone has any questions about getting started streaming, feel free to ask me on our next live stream. I'd be happy to have you there. And feel free to also connect with me on Instagram or Twitter as well. The same thing, it's at WillUTV for both.
So as you can see, everyone, Will's great. I learned that he was a teacher, high school teacher.
Yeah, for 3 years.
Before joining your PhD program now, and it's really cool to see, all these distinct sort of clusters of talents that you've synergized into one, effort.
I don't know.
No, it's really cool. It's like
it's as much of a synergy as that piece of bioprinted meat. Just this mess that's just, they say there's a strategy behind it, of really delicately mapping out all these fat and blood vessel and meat fibers together, but really you cut it in half and you look at it and it kind of looks like a mess. I'd still eat it. But it might not be the prettiest thing in the world.
I would too. Well, you've bioengineered a wonderful career for yourself and a great channel. So if there are no other questions, I hope that this has been informative, and it definitely has been fun. I really enjoyed this a lot. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Ari, for being here.
Also, thank you, Ari, for pretending I'm a doctor as well. Like all the good spam journals.
Yes, your esteemed research.
Esteemed doctor.
Yes. Yeah, it is funny. The language in those emails are often very generic. Yeah. You can tell when it's one of those. So, okay, well, if there are no other questions coming through, thank you, Will, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining and for asking your questions and participating, and for hopping on stage for a few times. It's really fun. So I'll see you all at the next one. Next week, I'm going to have Dr. Monique Smith from University of San Diego. She studies empathy, pain and empathy, and it's going to be really cool. We're going to talk about mirror neurons and all sorts of wild stuff. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Will, for your time and for your great insights, and hope to see you again soon on a live stream.
Yeah, well, dude, thanks so much for having me on. Catch y'all later.
Of course.
7 in the chat for all my community members. Thanks for showing up.
Oh, yeah. Look at that. The Twitch community stays together.
Yeah, look at that.
All right. I'm